7.
Morning, Gloria, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. In a week shattered by another horrific school mass murder, and in the Congress, the collapse of a debate centered on the fate of 1.8 million young men and women living in the country illegally, but having done so for so long a period of time, they really think of nothing else as home. I brought together 3 guests whom most of the people who know them believe to be good, decent, thoughtful, productive servants of the public good. In the second part of my program, I'm going to talk with Harvard professor of psychology Steven Pinker about his new book, Enlightenment Now, The Case for Reason, Science, Humanism, and Progress. And he's a great voice of optimism, generally about the world and the decline of violence it is experiencing over millennia, centuries, decades. Such a jarring conclusion compared to what we've seen this week in Florida and, of course, Las Vegas and Texas last year, much less the death toll in Syria and the ongoing savagery against the Rohingya in Southeast Asia and other places where massacres occur. But first, 2 United States senators who could almost be not more different if they were not essentially alike. Democrat Chris Coons of Delaware has served in the Senate from Delaware since 2010. He's a lifelong public servant and sadly a double Yaley, earning both his graduate degree in divinity and law from Old Eli's School. And Senator James Lankford is from Oklahoma, and before being elected to the Senate in 2014, served in the House, and before that he ran Oklahoma's largest and most famed church camp, Falls Creek, where basically every Oklahoman has to spend at least a few weeks of their lives. He's a graduate of UT Austin and Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. Together, they are leaders of the Senate's Bible study and the efforts to find a solution for the Dreamers. They are also co-chairs of the National Prayer Breakfast. And I want to start there, and perhaps with you, Senator Coons. Welcome, and Senator Lankford. A week ago, you had a bipartisan deal on the budget. You had the president and Carson Wentz at the big prayer breakfast, and it looked like maybe things were coming together. And a week later, we have a slaughter in Florida and the collapse of the Dreamers. So it's like 1 step forward and 100 steps backwards. What is your mood after this swing of events, Senator Coons?
Well, Hugh, it's great to be on with you, and it's great to be on with my friend James Lankford from Oklahoma. This was a very hard day for me yesterday on the floor of the Senate. We took up and failed to pass any of 4 different proposals that might have addressed some of the key issues in our broken immigration system. And as the father of 3 teenagers, to witness another massacre, this time in a high school in Parkland, Florida, is a bitter reminder of our failure in the Congress to take up and address anything that would tackle the mental health issues, the gun background check issues that Americans of all backgrounds are calling out for us to take some steps to address. So I remain hopeful because of my faith and because I know that there are people of goodwill on both sides in the Senate, but I'm gravely concerned, disappointed, frustrated by the impact of outside groups that have lobbied heavily against our making progress on these issues from both sides.
Senator Lankford, you too have a great heart for young people. You ran a church camp for all those years. I'm sure you were as deeply touched and horrified by Florida as Senator Coons. My question is, you're both members of this Bible study. When you go into this Bible study next week or whenever you get back to D.C., do you sit around and talk about the fact that the Senate essentially left 1.8 million kids high and dry and that it hasn't done anything to address these slaughters?
Well, interestingly enough, we don't talk about policy issues in this Bible study. We talk about our own personal faith, our families, our journey. That's become a priority for us to be able to get in there. Now, we obviously develop deeper relationships that once we walk outside that door, that impacts that greatly in the honesty of conversation. The key issue there is honest, trustful conversation. In D.C., it's hard to be able to find someone you can have an honest conversation with and disagree and to be able to establish trust. Senator Coons and I have that kind of relationship that we can get a chance to sit down together, be able to talk through the issues, say, here's where I'm coming from, and actually be able to hear each other, not just talk at each other. So that makes a world of difference. And you're all right. As someone who's worked for more than 20 years with students, my degree is in secondary education. My passion has been teenagers. I have kids that are teenagers. It is a very impactful day to see any time that you see a school shooting. Many of the schools around the country have greatly advanced their own security there with locking doors, limited access systems. This will be another evaluation for that. We've talked for a long time about mental health. The Congress has passed some things in the past couple of years on mental health and has dramatically increased funding for mental health. But this will continue to be an issue. And as now the story is coming out for this particular individual in Florida, it's once more that same issue again. We've got to be able to address not only how we handle our own families and our own communities and school security, but also continue to be able to handle how we treat each other so we can get a chance to work through hard things together.
Senator Coons, I talked to Secretary DeVos on Thursday on my radio show, Attorney General Sessions on Friday. They both supported the idea of hearings of a broad sort into the various toxins which are flooding into our system. Guns, the dark web. You know, we had 64,000 people die of fentanyl and heroin and opioid abuse last year. And, of course, you've got slaughters in schools. At what point does the Congress feel obliged to actually sort of convene as a committee of the whole and ask what the heck is going on with this country?
You ask a great question, Hugh, and I do think one of the things we need is strong bipartisan hearings in the United States Senate. One of the challenges we faced this past week in trying to come to a resolution on border security and the status of Dreamers and other immigration issues is that we hadn't had hearings in the relevant committees. The Judiciary Committee, on which I serve, the Homeland Security Committee, hadn't had a whole series of hearings to lay out the challenges and issues. And so in some ways it was left to senators like Senator Lankford and myself to dig into some of the proposals, the challenges, the accusations by folks pro and con on these bills and try and understand them. We have a number of senior senators in my caucus, Senator Durbin, Senator Menendez, have been engaged on these immigration issues for a very long time. But a majority of currently serving senators don't have deep knowledge about what it would mean to secure our southern border, about what it would mean to really provide a pathway to citizenship for Dreamers. And so a lot of our conversations in the bipartisan working group that Senator Lankford and I were both a part of for the last few weeks, we're simply trying to help our colleagues get caught up to what the issues are. And so in your conversations with the Attorney General and the Secretary of Education, I think they do correctly raise that we should be having more hearings in the Senate so that we can, in a thoughtful way, address the addiction crisis that is rolling throughout our country and tearing up families, and come up with responsible bipartisan proposals for how we can tackle gun violence. You know, because of advocacy by some that oppose research into gun violence, we don't even have federally funded research into what is causing gun violence in our country and how we could provide some meaningful interventions around the intersection of mental health problems and gun violence. I do think these things need study, they need hearings, and more than anything, we need to take action.
Senator Lankford, what happened on the Dreamers? I thought that President Trump made a generous offer of not only regularization, but a road to citizenship for 1.8 million people, far more than were enrolled in DACA. I thought the cost of $25 billion appropriated up front was reasonable, and the rest was in the joints and in the play. Why in the world did this collapse when it appears to be so close to getting across the goal?
I do think it's close. Let me back up to one quick thing Chris was saying as well. I do agree we need to have hearings, but I think he and I would both agree the issues about race relations and violence and mental health and taking care of our neighbors is ultimately not a government issue. It's a family and a neighbor issue. If our churches and our communities and nonprofits and neighbors taking care of neighbors, if we can't look up and develop those relationships and help people around us, there's absolutely nothing that government can do to pass enough laws to be able to actually take care of what's happening in our society. So society's issues first begin with society as a whole and us taking care of our families and our communities and our churches and that engagement. That will be a prime issue that we've got to continue to be able to push to people, is that passing one more law is not going to fix all of society. It's actually us engaging with each other. As far as the Dreamers, I do agree. The president put an incredibly gracious offer on the table and put one that was a middle ground piece. He had listened to a lot of people for months to be able to come into his office. They had put together a proposal. We tried to be able to do that, be able to hear all sides. For some people, just getting a chance to read through it and to be able to go through it and to see what's actually there rather than what the headlines are about it, I think would make a difference. My hope is, now that we've been through a failed vote series of 4 different sets of votes, that everyone will finally sit down and be serious and say, okay, let's look at all these issues and let's find an area